Well, here we are again, right here at Mysteries of the Superstition Mountains. And today we're going to talk about same thing again that people really like to hear about, and that's the clues of how to find gold. In fact, we even dedicated one whole series episode to it called the Dutchman's Clues Made Easy. And what we found when we were researching that was with all those clues that Jacob Waltz was supposed to have dropped in Julia Thomas's ear, they matched up to places that were both on the west side of the mountain and the east side of the mountain. We also found that there were people who would advocate that absolutely those clues went to the west, and there were an equal number of people that believed they went to the east side. Well, the key to the whole thing of what we were talking about was not to get you to where the gold was, but to explain where these clues could be, where those locations actually are. Now, me personally, I've never truly been convinced that Jacob Waltz said those clues to Julia Thomas at all, not on his deathbed at any rate. But what we do know, and we know for sure, that Jacob Waltz did tell Julia Thomas the clue about the board house. And ironically, this is one of the clues that we hear so little about, and yet it's probably the most important clue that Jacob Waltz left before he died with anybody.
Yeah, and the only reason that we really know about the board house clue so much is that in the Clay Worst episodes, the Gold Under the Dutchman's Bed and the Last Days of the Dutchman, he brings all that out.
Now, the board house was the old Cavaniss place. Matt Cavaniss was the first rancher to actually settle in the Superstition Mountain area.
There's an affidavit that's available that explains the custody of that gold, and he also explains the clue.
Now, the question always pops up, is this board house the same as the stone house or the cow barn or the Quarter Circle U Ranch? Some people call it the Cavaniss Ranch, others call it the Cavanaugh Ranch, and it gets really confusing. In fact, it's been confusing for about as long as I can remember. And the next question that has to pop up for Larry, how did this whole mess come about anyway?
There are some books that claim that Cavaniss built the board house. There are other books that claim that Cavanaugh built the board house. Some books say that Cavaniss had a goat ranch up at Wickenburg. Others say Cavanaugh had a goat ranch up at Wickenburg. So the thing of it is, both these people were named Matt, and they're one and the same person. So anybody that's reading this kind of stuff about Cavaniss and Cavanaugh, just don't get confused by that. It's not the author's fault that put them in there. That just that historical mispronunciation of names by people. Where I really want to start though with Matt Cavaniss is when he got to Phoenix. Today we're dealing with 66 pages of his diary, or memoirs, whichever you want to call it. Cavaniss was involved in a lot of stuff, but mostly he was always freighting stuff. You know, he had a partnership in a saloon. He had a partner that worked in blacksmithing. He'd done some butchering. He always had some cattle on hand because he was butchering. But mostly he was hauling freight from the farmers in the Phoenix area to Fort McDowell. And there was a place east of Phoenix that was called McDowell Crossing, where you cross the Salt River. And that's where everybody went to cross the river to get to Fort McDowell. And this was eventually called Rowe Station.
So who was this Rowe guy anyway?
Well, Frank Rowe had a couple of daughters. And as Matt was making his trips to Fort McDowell, evidently he was sparking Rowe's daughters because Frank Rowe and his wife became his father and mother-in-law. And so he married, I think it was 1871, he married Alice Rowe. And he continued his trips on up into Fort McDowell, where he would have certainly known of the existence of the chief of the Pima Indians, Chief Azul. The Pimas were a militia unit, along with the Maricopas, working with the Army. And he certainly would have known of each other at that time with all the trips he made up in there. But along about 1874, the depredations by the Apaches got a couple of guys caught out there, and they tortured them badly and cut their bodies up and all this sort of stuff. And Rose, at about that time, you can read these in the Last Bugle Call. That's documented in military annals. And Rowe got caught up in that. The Apaches raided his place, burnt down a couple of buildings, and stole all of his stock.
So essentially what we're saying is that Frank Rowe actually had nothing left. He had nothing at all.
Well, that's correct. He didn't have any milk cows to milk, and even if he did, he didn't have any horses to haul it up to Fort McDowell because the Army wasn't coming to his place to get the milk. And Matt and his wife was living somewhere in the Phoenix area. I don't know if it was right in town, but when they lost their ability to make a living, he invited them to come and live in his house with his daughter, Frank's daughter. So that was 1874, and in 1875 he got the freighting contract with Silver King Mine, and his first trip to Yuma was with 40 tons of ore, and when he got to Yuma, there was a message waiting for him to proceed on to San Diego, that the steamer had gone under.
Steamer sank?
Well, there's two ways to look at that. You know, back in the old days, sometimes when somebody died, they said he went under. Oh. But it could have been a financial type of thing, too. You know, you say of a business going under. But he was talking about one steamer going under, so yes, the steamer sank. And when he got close to San Diego, there was another message waiting for him. I think it was a writer that came out and met him and says, if you have to kill the mules, kill them, but you get to San Diego by a certain time because there's a steamer coming to San Francisco. And he got there in time and they offloaded. But the point would be here, if his partner, Mr. Barney, who was in San Francisco, was arranging loads for him to take back. He wasn't going back deadheaded. But if the steamer sank, then what he was supposed to be taking back went down with the ship. Anyway, that ship at San Diego was heading for San Francisco, and there wouldn't have been anything on there that he could take back, so he came back empty. And many subsequent trips that he made, Mr. Barney always had loads for him to take back, and many of these trips took him to Yuma, taking things back for his boss. And there was one particular incident where they had some 16-inch by 16-inch by 80-foot long beams that had to be hauled up to the Silver King from Yuma. And he couldn't find anybody to make that run. And he finally asked Matt if he thought he could do it, and he just, yeah, I can take care of that. So evidently he took the ore boxes off of the wagons and loaded those beams on like flatbeds. And other freighters, when they saw what he did, says, well, that was pretty easy. He says, yeah, now that you see how it's done. And a lot of people said that Cavaniss could haul anything. Well, he freighted the 20 stamp mill from Yuma up to Pinell City. And of course, once the stamp mill went into effect at Pinell City, he no longer had to make these trips to Yuma. They were just making 5-mile trips from the Silver King down to Pinell City and back.
What does the diary say about this lumber? There weren't any lumber mills here in Arizona? There were stamp mills, I guess, but there weren't any lumber mills, were there?
According to his diary, there was at least one stamp mill that somewhere up around Wickenburg, but that was under a hauling contract by somebody else. And there wouldn't have been any deadhead loads coming back if they were using that under somebody else's contract. So that's why they were going to Yuma, so they had loads coming back. But on one of his trips, he met Chief Azul of the Pimas down at Florence. And Azul asked him just into conversation about cattle, and Matt was looking for a place for cattle, and Azul told him about a spring in a certain place, and he went home to his wife, which he says in the diary, I had just moved my family into. And this was a stone house somewhere near Phoenix where they were living. And he told his wife that tomorrow I'm going to go out and find this spring that Azul was telling me about. And she says, well, I wouldn't put any stock in what an Indian said. So she kind of had a negative attitude about that business. But he came back and told her that I found the spring right off the bat, and it's a wonderful place out there. And she says, he said that his wife said, well, I'm very happy that you found a place to put them cows. Well, this isn't in the diary, but this opens up why some people believe a certain thing. The stone house they were living in was probably, you know, every stone house that they put together, there's always some cracks and stuff. And every once in a while, she found a rattlesnake inside the house. And the corral was built right next to the house. Now everybody think, you know, the smell was pretty terrible, and that's why she says, I'm very glad that you found some place to put these cattle. And Matt says right here, he says, it just seems like there's nothing I could do to satisfy
So maybe he's going to try and do that by building her a new house?
That's exactly what happened. He arranged through Barney to get a load of lumber sent on the steamer down to Yuma, and he brought that back up and built her a board house. He says, I've got my ranch up and going, and I built a fine house, and I'm about as happy as a man could be.
So now maybe Alice is happy too. You know, when I first got out here, I visited a place called the Lost Dutchman store, and that was on what is now Gold Rush Road that goes out to the Quarter Circle U Ranch. And the board house was like literally 100 yards away from that. It wasn't that far away. And people have mistakenly said that, oh, the board house, that's out at the Quarter Circle U Ranch. Well, that just wasn't so. First off, the ranch wasn't there. It wasn't established by Tex Barkley until 1907, and that was 3/4 of a mile away.
Yeah, that's true. You know, they divorced in '77, and Matt put in his diary that he was pretty depressed from that time on. Not very much meant much to him, but he made an arrangement with his wife that she would get the ranch and the cattle, and that the cattle were to be sold piecemeal to take care of the children. Mm-hmm. And He also said that he was a happy man up until 1880. Well, he was divorced in 77, so what happened in 1880 that changed the picture? Well, that's when his wife sold the ranch. and he had to actually pay a woman $100 a month to take care of 2 of the children. One of the children stayed with her, and of course he was out making a living, and he was gone for weeks at a time doing this and that. And by her selling off the ranch, it changed the whole concept.
What'd she get for the ranch, just for kicks and giggles?
I thought it was $200.
200.
But I don't know. I heard that from another source. Okay. Well, anyway. She remarried that in '81. She remarried a guy named Perdue, and I think this is what really disturbed Matt more than anything. But the new owners of the ranch are the ones that built the stone house everybody talks about over at Quarter Circle U, because Tom Collenborn was working for the Barkleys in the late 50s, working cattle with them, while I was working for Pete Allen over in Queen Valley running cattle for him. And Barkley's told him that the stone house that's over there where the barn is at the Quarter Circle U was built in 1880, right after she sold it. The new owners built that stone house, and everybody's confused that stone house with the one in Phoenix where the rattlesnakes and the stinky corral was.
So it's really fair to say at this point that, like, for the next 20 years or so, there was nothing really going on out in that area except the cattle business. Even the Dutch hunters there wasn't that much of a deal going on with Dutch hunters out there at all at that time until 1931.
Yeah, 1931 is when the Adolph Ruth story broke. And everybody was out there searching for his body. And we've got a picture here that's shown up of the board house, and there's 4 cars in that picture. One of them is really hard to see. You'll only see the roof of it down by the corral. But this is in 1931. That picture was taken while they were doing the search for Adolph Ruth, and of course they found these bodies. But I want you to notice the road on the right-hand side of the board house. And after it gets past the board house, it curves to the left. And one of these cars on the viewer's side of the board house is sitting on a little roadway. And you can see that in this map that we're putting up that shows a straight line from the Quarter Circle U Ranch to that curve. And this cutoff road there is where that car is sitting. And that's where the board house was located. And right across the road from the curve is where that store is that you were talking about. And this is 3/4 of a mile from the Quarter Circle U Ranch, which, as you say, nobody ever heard of the Quarter Circle U Ranch until 1907 when the Barkleys took over. So Tex Barkley's the one that supplied the horses for this search, you know. And after this was in Life magazine. This was in the middle of the Depression. And the stories of finding gold was on everybody's mind, you know, and the Dutch hunters were all over the place. And after this was over, Tex Barkley made the statement that he says this is his words now, "I'm damn sick and tired of those Dutch hunters coming out here to the board house to start their search for the Lost Dutchman Gold Mine." So Tex Barkley tore the board house down.
So old Tex finally got his wish. Apparently the board house clue disappeared about the same time that the board house did, right after Tex tore it down. That's probably why people aren't all that aware of what the board house clue was all about.
And that is exactly right, because after the Adolph Ruth affair, so over 20 years later, a raft of books become out. And they don't even mention the board house because it wasn't there anymore. These people weren't writing about it in their books because it was gone. We're on location here on the very road that the Cavaniss board house was located on. This is the entrance to the Quarter Circle U Ranch, which is about a mile from here, but only a couple of hundred yards north on this road is the Cavaniss board house. In 1931, when this picture was taken of the board house, during the search for Adolph Ruth's body, the Peralta Road that we know today did not exist. This was the road that went to the Quarter Circle U.
So when the Dutchman talked about going out to the board house, and that if he was not able to travel, he'd have to stay at the board house with the woman and the 3 children, there's absolutely no question but what the Dutchman's point of departure to take Julia and Riney to the mine was the Cavaniss Ranch. This is unquestionable.
Yes, the Cavaniss board house, just another mystery of the Superstition Mountains.
Thank you for watching this episode of Mysteries of the Superstition Mountains.